During the month of August, we recall many important events in modern Polish history, including the Battle of Warsaw in 1920 and the start of the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. August is also a time to remember the role played by Polish forces in the liberation of France from German occupation. That role was played by the officers and men of the 1st Polish Armored Division. The division began its existence before World War II as Poland's 10th Mechanized Cavalry Brigade, known as the Black Brigade from the distinctive black leather coats worn by its officers as well as the German-style helmets worn by the men. The brigade was commanded by Colonel Stanislaw Maciek, who would later be promoted to general. In 1939, when Germany invaded Poland to start World War II, Maciek and his men were called on to defend their homeland. The 10th Brigade, under Maciek's skilled leadership, mounted a series of mobile defensive actions that allowed outnumbered Polish forces to evade destruction by the powerful German invaders. At the end of the campaign, Maciek and many of his men escaped from occupied Poland and made their way to France, where Maciek rebuilt the 10th Brigade. When Germany attacked France in 1940, General Maciek and his men again went into action, but Allied defenses proved no match for Hitler's legions, and France surrendered to the invaders. Once again, Maciek and his men had to escape, this time to England. From 1940 to 1943, Maciek rebuilt and expanded his brigade into the 1st Polish Armored Division, recruiting Poles who had escaped from Nazi or Soviet occupation, as well as Poles living in the diaspora. By the spring of 1944, they were part of a huge Allied army preparing for the liberation of Europe. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied forces invaded German-occupied Europe on the beaches of Normandy, beginning one of the most important campaigns of the war. The 1st Armored Division arrived in France in July 1944 and was attached to the Canadian 1st Army. The Poles would fight alongside the Canadians throughout the remainder of the war. Although the Allies had seized a foothold in France in June, battle-hardened German forces in the challenging terrain of Normandy slowed the Allied advance to a crawl throughout June and July. By the end of July, however, American forces under General George S. Patton broke through German lines and began to advance rapidly around the German flank, while from the north, British, Canadian, and Polish forces pushed south in an effort to link up with the American spearheads. The combined Canadian-Polish force was given the most critical sector, charged with stemming the German effort to escape the closing Allied trap. By August 18th, hundreds of thousands of German troops, along with their tanks and equipment, were falling back to avoid encirclement, fighting a furious rearguard action. German defenses halted the Canadians, British, and American forces in brutal fighting. The 1st Armored Division, operating in 3 battle groups, however, broke through the German lines, driving to the southeast toward a series of hills that commanded the surrounding countryside through which the Germans were attempting to escape. One Polish battle group pushed all the way through the German forces, linking up with the U.S. 90th Infantry Division. With other Allied forces stalemated, Maciek ordered his other 2 battle groups to hold the high ground in the midst of the German retreat, including the height known as Hill 262, or Machuga, with the mace in Polish. Here, the isolated forces would attempt to keep the Germans from escaping while his allies regrouped. By the morning of August 19th, the Germans soon realized the Poles were blocking their retreat. Nazi forces launched a series of furious attacks on Hill 262, led by their most experienced and fanatical troops, including elements of the SS divisions Adolf Hitler, SS Das Reich, and SS Hitler Youth. One eyewitness of the battle was Colonel Pierre Segivny, a French-Canadian artillery observer serving with the Poles. Although the Poles weren't able to completely block the German escape routes, atop Hill 262, Segivny and his Polish comrades were able to direct Canadian and Polish heavy artillery, zeroing in on the exposed German columns surrounding them on all sides. He recalled the devastating effects of one barrage. "I saw numerous vehicles burst into flames," he wrote, terrified horses trapped in their harnesses, men trying to flee. Their efforts were in vain. A shell soon found them, and I saw bodies flying through the air. Another shell lifted the turret from a tank. A tank nearby caught fire. Our machine guns carried on the slaughter. 10 minutes later, everything on the road was in flames. Throughout the day of August 20th, German SS men repeatedly tried to overwhelm the men of the 1st Armored Division. The Poles defeated every attack but took heavy casualties. Zagibny remembered, "Our losses mounted constantly, but now I could not believe my eyes. The Boche were advancing toward us, singing, 'Deutschland, Deutschland, du über alles.' We let them come to within 50 yards, then we mowed down their ranks. More waves followed. When the 5th came, we were out of ammunition. The Poles charged them with the bayonet. During the day, we suffered 8 attacks like this." Finally, with the Poles nearly out of ammunition, Canadian forces pushed through to link up and relieve the defenders of Hill 262. As a result of the battle, German forces in France were decimated, losing tens of thousands of dead, wounded, and captured, and nearly all their equipment. All around the Polish positions were scenes of carnage, where countless German occupiers met their end. While some German troops managed to escape, the German occupation of France quickly collapsed. As a result of the Polish stand at Falaise, the German army in the West would be unable to mount major operations for almost 6 months. Polish 1st Armored Division, under the command of General Maciek, would go on to help liberate many parts of Belgium and Holland alongside their Canadian comrades. In the final weeks of the war, Maciek's men captured the major German naval base at Wilhelmshaven. Since the German Navy had started the war in 1939 by shelling the Polish base at Westerplatte, it was a fitting conclusion to the 1st Division's exploits. Nevertheless, Poland did not gain freedom in 1945, and the nation was handed over to the Soviet Union, beginning a new occupation. Many of the Polish soldiers were unable or unwilling to return home and remained in the West, settling in England or the United States. The 1st Division was disbanded. General Maciek, who had fought Nazi Germany from the first day of the war to the last, was denied a pension by the British and ended up working as a waiter in a pub. If the people of the towns and cities he and his men helped liberate raised money to help him in his retirement. After the fall of communism in 1989, General Maciek had his Polish citizenship restored and received the honors he had long been denied. He passed away in 1994 and was buried beside his men at the Polish Military Cemetery in Breda, Holland. Colonel Zagibny was awarded the Virtuti Militari, Poland's highest decoration for valor, and for his heroism alongside his Polish comrades. He returned to Canada after the war and served his country as a member of Parliament. Today, the story of the 1st Armored Division and its tradition have been revived as part of the modern Polish Army. The tradition of the 1st Division is carried on by the soldiers of the 10th Armored Cavalry Brigade, named in honor of General Maciek. Its emblem is the same one carried by Polish soldiers in the battles of the Second World War. It remains a pillar of Poland's land forces and a reminder of the courage and sacrifice of the men who helped liberate Europe from tyranny and terror.